Thank you, Wale. So for visual accessibility, what we are talking about is both the way that we design elements like little links or buttons to the way that the fonts show up on your website or your digital product. For color contrast, we must ensure that the color contrasts are high enough so the foreground and the background are separated from each other so people with low vision can distinguish the color, and people with color blindness can also view the differences between the background and the foreground as well. Some of the times that you go on the web now, there are a tendency to use a light gray text against a white background. And for people with without color blindness or without low vision or blindness, some of us can see that clearly, and for other, those things are just running into each other. So color contrast needs to be high, and you can check for the color contrast at WebAIM color contrast checker. That tells you whether or not your background and foreground are meeting the Wcag 2.0 guidelines. For buttons, for example, sometimes we don't, as designers, we don't want to call too much attention to a button, but by making it so muted, you are potentially preventing your users or your customers from completing a task. So when you are designing a button or when you're doing links or instruction, make sure that you're not just using colors to differentiate it. For links, for example, make sure that it's either bolded or underlined and in a different color, a combination of both. For websites and digital products and apps with carousels or slideshows, sometimes you go on those pages, you see that it's a video on the header that automatically plays, or there's a bunch of images that just automatically play through. It's important to not autoplay those elements on your website, on your app and digital products. It's best to give the users the ability to start, pause, and skip any of the slideshows or carousel or videos on your headers and throughout your website. Nothing should be auto-playing on your web pages. Next slide. So I know that someone asked about spacing in visual design. For spacing, we are talking about font accessibility and also formatting. For font accessibility, the best fonts to use for people with reading disabilities and people who have low vision would be sans serif fonts. Those fonts are the fonts without the little tags on the side of the letters. And the minimum font size, what we are talking about here are points. So the minimum font size is 12 to 14 points for digital. If you're printing your any of the documents, it's best to have a small print, large print, and that is the large print is at 18 points. For slide decks, what we have showed here is fonts at 24 points or higher. The spacing that we are using for this slide deck is 1.5. It's important if you're a designer to translate all of this into the pixel world in InDesign or Photoshop or any other those programs. Make sure that you're letting between your lines are increased so that no letters or lines are running into each other. And we have shown here some fonts like Ariel, Helvetica. Those are the fonts that you can use and know that it's accessible, and the different font size of how it would show up on a slide deck here. The spacing is to make sure that people with reading disabilities and people with low vision would be able to read all of the context and text within your digital products without words running into each other, and giving space also lets people know where a piece of information starts and another piece of information ends. Next slide. This is formatting. Wale will talk a little bit about formatting and how it applies to accessibility.
Absolutely. You guys can hear me, right? My mic is on?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So formatting. So this is more of the, it does affect visual appearance, but it also affects sort of more of how your website is coded and created, you know, underneath what we actually see. So some things to keep in mind if you are using a website builder platform, or if you're creating your own template or working with, you know, an already existing system, these are things to look out for. So alt text for images, I mentioned that earlier, and we'll be actually in the next slide talking about images. Heading tags. So this is very important. So when we are making headings, a lot of designers will just visually style a heading by increasing the font size and making it bold or underlined or both. Unfortunately, that does not give it a proper heading tag. And what I mean by heading tag is H1, H2, H3, all the way up to H6. And so it's important that we are actually using those proper tags, whether it's in a website using HTML and or an electronic document by using built-in Microsoft Word styles, right? If you use the built-in styles, then you are using tags, right? If you're creating a PDF, you can actually use Adobe Acrobat Pro to tag the PDF and add headings. And including a heading structure is also very important. The level of headings that you should use. Just a few quick rules, which we'll probably get into this more in depth in a different session. But use one heading so only one heading one per page, and it should be something broad, such as inclusive digital home or about inclusive digital. Then broad sections of a page could be heading level 2, such as news, right? And let's say upcoming events, right? And so news would be a heading 2, upcoming events would be a heading 2. If there are sections within those, such as each news item, let's say under the news section, those would be heading level 3s. Each event under the event section would be heading level 3s. So you see, we're trying to have a heading hierarchy going from 1 to 2 to 3 and not skipping around. Tables, so tables 1 should not be used for layout purposes, and 2 should have proper tags if they are being used. So what do we mean by should not be used for layout purposes? You should not use a table to create a certain visual aesthetic for your email or your web page or your PDF documents. You should only be using the tables like tags and features for tabular data. So tabular data includes schedules, search results perhaps, contact information, right? Things that actually belong in a table or a spreadsheet should be in a table. Instead of using, you know, a table to create an aesthetic where you have a column on the left and a column on the right, for instance, right? And the reason for that is assistive technologies will read that content as if it was a table. So it will say things like, you know, you're in the middle of a sentence or a paragraph and it will say row 2, column 3, right? Which doesn't really make sense unless you're actually reading a table. Lists, so just making sure that you're properly using tags for lists, whether HTML, using the list tags there, or just the proper built-in list styles, or the list feature in Office, and list tags in PDFs. Links as well, so using tags for those, making sure that links have unique and descriptive labels. So instead of click here and learn more, making sure that your link has actually a unique and descriptive label, such as apply for our services, right? Or learn more about Project X, right? That should be the whole link label. So just by reading the link itself, you should be able to know where it's going to take you. Whereas click here, if you read click here by itself, it does not do that, right? Learn more, especially if you have multiple click here's or multiple learn more links that lead to different places. So what I would just suggest is having a format where you write learn more about and then whatever the name of that page is that it's going to take you